So, one of the questions that we humans often ask ourselves as we progress, especially into adulthood, is when I know what I want to do, why do I end up doing the opposite? If I know what's healthy for me, why do I not always choose what's healthy for me? And especially when we have additional pressure. So, day-to-day life, it can be a little easier to make those decisions, but as soon as there's additional pressure, stress, um, things building up, those are the times that we tend to say, okay, wait, never mind. I'm just gonna go down the easy route because that's what I'm used to doing. And there's an interesting relationship to stress that's often described as an inverted U relationship. If there's not enough stress, and by stress, I'm going to use that, let's define that. Stress being something that pushes us towards a response. And oftentimes we think about stress as something that we want to avoid. I definitely don't want to be stressed out. I'm too stressed. I want to avoid stress because it makes me uncomfortable. But that's exactly what keeps us alive at the same time. It's what keeps us creating, searching for food and building shelter and investing in healthy relationships. And at this point in time, pursuing money and making sure we have a job that pays the bills to take care of all the things that we want to take care of. So stress in and of itself is not a bad thing. Cortisol is naturally occurring within our body, and then we've labeled it our stress hormone, so we always think we want to reduce it. But having some stress can be healthy. If there's too little stress, we tend to have really delayed reaction times, reduced motivation, lower engagement with other people. It's kind of like, whatever happens, happens. I'm good. That's what I call vacation time, right? Or what should be vacation. Not all vacations are relaxing either. So we kind of start there. Too little stress is not helpful. So then we get moderate stress. We'll call that kind of the daily stressors of just being alive and being a human on this planet. And with moderate stress, we have improved learning, increased focus, faster information processing. We start thinking through things a little bit quicker, and optimal performance. Now, optimal performance, again, we're going to define as showing up in a way that is authentic and how we want to be showing up in our daily life.
Mhm.
So that's what that moderate stress. So if we're looking at this inverted U, we've started down low with too little. We've kind of gone up the curve to this moderate amount of stress. And now we're going to go down the other side and call it excessive or prolonged stress. And what happens there is our attention becomes very narrow, right? The first thing we do when we have a lot of stress is what? We fixate on one or two things. I need to fix this. I need to control this. I need to find a solution to this. I need to figure out why this is happening. So that happens. That's the first thing to happen. We have increased emotional reactivity. If we're really fixated on something, then if something else happens, we tend to kind of blow up, lose our marbles, overreact because we're in this state of heightened anxiety, hypervigilance, being very aware of things. And oftentimes, that extra little stressor is something that another human says or does. Somebody cuts us off in traffic. Boom, that's, in our mind. I can't believe you did that. Why can't you see I'm here? We over respond to that. We end up calling that road rage. Our partner says something to us that we take in a way that's very personal, and we get very defensive about it rather than just letting it be something that they say. Um, so that increased emotional reactivity, narrowed attention, reduced working memory. How many times are you in an argument with somebody and your mind is like this gray box? There's nothing to say. All the things that made sense before the conversation are out of your mind. You can't think of any reason why you did A, B, or C, or D, or how you wanted to address the conversation. Or if you're in a work environment, everything you've ever known about the company or your product just totally leaves your mind. You have nothing to say about it. We get this in reduced working memory where we're not able to work at optimum capacity. So now we have brain fog, narrowed attention, increased emotional reactivity. And the last one is we have a greater reliance on our habitual responses. What does that mean? We go to what feels familiar. right? We've talked about how the brain is wired for efficiency. And in that efficiency, it's always looking for the path of least resistance. And it does that oftentimes before we have really thought about what's happening. So something happens and the brain immediately goes down 5 steps. Oh, I know what this is. This feels familiar. I respond this way. This is what we're going to do. And before we know it, we're just responding. And that's what takes us back to that original question of if I know what I want to be doing, why do I end up doing something else? And typically it's because we're over the hump of moderate stress and we're into the excessive stress mode. And that's where our default way of thinking is just taking over. So when we break it down a little bit like that, we start to feel a little bit smarter. I do anyway. Like, oh, I'm not a complete idiot. I don't just trip and fall into my responses sometimes. There's a reason that these things happen. And it happens because of how the brain works, how the brain is wired, how it has kept us alive. So a lot of times as a mental health clinician, I'll hear people say, "Oh, I just hate my brain. I just wish I had a different brain." Or I hate the way that I think. So the brain is an organ. Thought is something that's developed. The brain will structurally change over time based on what we expose it to, and certainly based on the amount of prolonged stress that we put it under. So over time, the hippocampus, which is where memory is formed, starts to decline or atrophy. That makes a lot of sense why when we have excessive or prolonged stress, we have reduced working memory. Our prefrontal cortex is another area of the brain that will start to break down with prolonged stress. That's our executive functioning. That's our focus. That's our attention. That's creativity. That's solving problems. So when we look at stress and the amount of pressure that we put on ourselves over an extended period of time, we see where we end up getting exactly the opposite of what we wanted originally. We've hit that optimal point of, man, this stress is working for me. I'm so motivated. Everything is clicking. Look how focused I am, how smart I am. I've learned so many things. I'm performing optimally. And then we're into the what is happening? Why is my brain not working? Why can I not respond in the way I was responding? Why are my relationships challenging right now? Why do I want to just escape? And that escape is what leads into those habitual responses. The escape is what leads us to alcohol, shopping, ice cream, running away, isolating, finding excuses to not do things, distraction. So good news is we can go backwards on the curve. Just like we went up the bell originally and down the other side, we can go back the other side of the bell and get back to that optimal performance and moderate stress. Now, there can be acute time periods where intense stress is helpful. For military and first responders, in those initial moments, now over time, that creates a lot of issues for those individuals who serve in our communities in that capacity, in our country in that capacity, because it becomes excessive and prolonged stress. But in those initial moments where the adrenaline is high and they're responding to a crisis, things can align and be very optimal. Just like for anyone who's not in that type of industry, we can have things that happen in our life where we're like, man, how did I just show up and like everything just fit and I knew what to do and my thinking was clear because it's momentary. So this backside of the bell curve that we're talking about, or the upside down U, is when we're talking about excessive and prolonged stress. It'll contribute to difficulty learning new information. The brain wants to just auto process. It'll also contribute to a persistent performance plateau. I don't know if any of you have experienced that. I definitely have in life where you feel like everything is going well, and then you just hang out at this plateau, kind of like losing weight. For anyone else out there who has tried to lose weight at any point in time, like things are great, the body's responding, everything's working, and then you get to this certain place where you just hang out. and you're doing all the same things, right? But the body has hit this plateau. Now, with weight loss, that's different. That's the body physiologically responding to modified behavior and changing how it's going to respond over time. But with our thinking, we do the same thing. We hit that plateau because the brain has now structurally changed to a way that it's not serving us in the way that it was. So in order to go backwards, we have to do a couple things. The first one is we have to recognize where we're at and why we're responding the way we are and how we got there. And the second, this is where psilocybin microdosing is helpful, is looking at how we can structurally change the brain to reduce our stress responses and go more back upside the backside of that bell curve to where we're in a moderate stress amount. So I'm going to pause because I see lots of various facial responses to this conversation, and I'd love to hear what's on your mind as we introduce this idea of too little stress, moderate amount being optimal, and then excessive stress leading to a place where we're responding in ways we don't want to. Has anyone else ever woken up or been in a situation and thought, why did I just do this? This is the opposite of what I wanted to do in this scenario.
I'll go ahead and speak. So we went to California for a week, and of course it was the 6 days of nonstop because family, friends, trying to see everybody, get everything in. And the 6 days I was out there, he was only out there for three. Um, but it's just fast paced. And then right before I left, our system went down, and I had to work a 13-hour day on Sunday. And so when I get back, I'm like, okay, we're back, you know, and of course, jump into the work week. And it's like every time I turned around, there was a problem. And I quickly went over that hump. And I actually even told two of my coworkers, I said, I'm sorry if I'm snapping. I'm not mad at you. I'm not upset. I said, I've reached that level where I'm reacting. And I
Yeah.
knew I was reacting, but I couldn't stop myself.
Mhm.
Yeah. And because I was tired and wasn't caught up on my sleep and it was hot, I wasn't none of my normal, like I'll go for a walk. Well, it was too hot to go for a walk. So none of the normal things I do helped. So I ended up eating a bag of candy corn, which is not what I wanted to do, but it got me through the day. So,
Sometimes that is helpful. That's a great example of all the little stressors piling up. And to your point, it's not that we're completely ignorant to it. We know that we're responding in a way that's not the way we want to show up or that's not typical or not healthy, but it feels uncontrollable. And that's exactly where I was talking about the brain being efficient. It's like the brain kind of says, "Oh, I got you, girl. I'll take over here." And then we're in the background saying, "No, not like that. Don't do it that way."
yeah. And I think luckily I've learned enough about myself that I will pre-warn people and say, okay, I'm in that area. I have no control. I'm not mad. I don't mean to take it out on you. Please don't take offense. And I've worked with my coworkers for up to 20 some years, so we can talk to each other that way.
Yeah.
But I knew I couldn't stop myself.
Hmm.
And none of the normal things I would try, breathing, this, that was working.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I just kind of had to write it out.
And that's a great example of those momentary times where things happen and we end up in that momentarily, not enough sleep, too many things going on, not able to take care of ourselves in the same way, especially with travel. Always adds additional stressors. So those times in life are going to happen regardless. A lot of times in our conversations about microdosing and mental health and how we're changing our thinking, it's like, oh, well, if I do these things, then I'm never going to have another issue. My relationships are going to be perfect. I'm always going to show up in the way I want because I have restructured my brain and it is back to optimal functioning and performance. But that is not the case. We're still a human being on this planet with billions of other human beings. Were we a human being on the planet with no other human beings? Probably far less stress. But instead, we have billions of other human beings that we're interacting with, and that is a complicating factor. So our goal is to shift how we typically respond, how our life typically is looking, what the day-to-day starts to look like so that there's a reprieve, like Becky was sharing, she's not in that mindset all the time. It was things built up to this point where the response was different, but then you settle back in. Go play golf with your spouse, you go to dinner, you do other things to kind of wind that back down. So, but that is an excellent example. Thank you so much for sharing of just how those stressors compound on top of themselves. Who else has something that's come to mind for them with this? Whether it's a day-to-day response or overall shift in perception and thinking.
I'll share. Charity. I had to gather my thinking for a minute here, but I will add in, it's funny, I didn't know it was a bag of candy corn until now. But we were in bed the other night and there was like a half of candy corn that I discovered like under a pillow. And I was just joking. And I was like, what's this? And she's like, well, I had to have some candy corn. So I didn't know it was a whole bag until now. So,
This is the
so
place
that
for vulnerability.
so
I try and limit myself to one bag a year because candy corn's a weakness.
that's all I had to say. No. So I guess I mean you're outrageous. I mean, I'll start with that, Charity. It's like every time we get on, it's like it's I don't know how you know it's like we met before the meeting or something, but I mean I had an experience a few days ago on my drive. I'm in the car a lot, so I have a lot of time for the mind to kick in. And so but I discovered something, and I had actually microdosed that morning. I don't know. I really don't think that I would have gone this path if microdosing was not in place. It was very vivid and very apparent, and I could tell. And I really contemplated, wow, I microdosed this morning. This is crazy that this has come about. And so I've got to ask you first, I won't take too much time, but where does grow your own thoughts come from?
The phrase "grow your own thoughts."
Yeah, I
Yep.
mean, your company is that
Like,
the
yes. So grow your own thoughts as a phrase. We started as a mental health counseling practice. So Colorado Teletherapy Services is our mental health counseling practice. And as we sustained, I'm going to say just as a mental health counseling practice with all the traditional modalities, what we found is that everything is rooted in how we think. So how do we change the way that we think? We can't do it through just, tapping and talking and these traditional therapeutic modalities that can have their place. And I'm not in no way diminishing those things. They can be helpful, but ultimately they do not create permanent, lasting change. That's where psilocybin does. And so we've been following the research on psilocybin and the actual neuroscience of what it does in the brain. And so grow your own thoughts came from the concept of number one, thinking for yourself. Instead of living in this modified way of thinking and being, thinking about your thoughts and determining what thoughts are helpful to you. And then secondly, the neuroplasticity aspect of using psilocybin, creating new neural connections. So you are literally growing new neural connections, which gives you an opportunity to think in different ways and choose your own way of thinking. And then, of course, a little bit of a play on the cultivation side because we offer mushroom cultivation, so growing mushrooms. So that's why our mushroom cultivation kit is called the Thought Box, which somebody recently referred to it as thoughts in a box. I was like, oh, that's fun. So, yeah. But yeah, so short answer to that, grow your own thoughts is neuroplasticity and choosing intentionally the thoughts that we have.
Okay, thank you for that. And I kind of thought of that, but I went to Grow Your Own Thoughts like after my experience because I mean, this is like almost this may come across maybe almost as a billboard for what you just defined. Okay. But it was Wednesday morning or third. I think it was Wednesday morning. I shared with Becky on the way back from the golf course this morning. I'm like, I cannot wait to get on the call this morning because I want to share an experience that I had that I hadn't shared with you yet. But I wanted to, but it was like Wednesday and the work day and everything. It kind of, I just didn't bring it up. But now I am. And um, so I was driving I can't remember exactly what the thoughts were, but something came into my mind. I was thinking about it, and I really was wondering why. And then because it just didn't have any, I don't even know why. And so I backtracked with my thinking of what was I thinking before that, and what was I thinking before that? What brought me to this thought? And then I was able to actually, I guess, give myself an answer of, oh, that was occurring. So right when I was like in that discovery of, okay, it made sense. I was thinking about that, and that led me to that, which was completely irrelevant to any of it. Just like that was the path I went down. And so then all of a sudden, another random thing that completely had didn't correlate to anything that I was contemplating and trying to discover or had discovered appeared in my head. And then that then triggered to the aha that I wanted to share here is that, okay, that just appeared. I can't backtrack on any of that. That just all of a sudden is there. And I wish I could remember like what it was, the subject and whatnot. But it just was there. And I thought, well, that's interesting because then I started thinking about how thoughts sometimes they just pop in. And I can't contemplate on why it occurred. And it was this particular instance, and I think it's what got me really thinking about it, is that it was just I couldn't backtrack on, okay, why did that just come here? Because there was no rational just reason for it to occur. And so then I thought, okay, well, I had a short period then of thinking, well, I can create what I want to think about. And then I thought, well, I'm creating my thought. But that thought that it just popped in. There was no creation of it. And it was a very present moment. And I thought, well, I wonder what it would be like to actually see myself build the thought. And I guess in science, it would be like watching the neurons tapping each other or whatever, however the science of that, occurring and them going and triggering that and triggering that. And then I got into like this, like, I don't know, maybe a more entertainment world of like imagining like these minions, like putting together blocks that are that have like the subject of the thought that I don't recognize yet, but they're building it in there. And then they all look at each other and say, okay, we're done. And then they send it off. And all of a sudden, then it's in my head. And so I think that was like kind of a funny way of thinking about it. But I was like, that was what I thought about. I thought, wow, that would be interesting. I know that I can control like where my thinking is and what I want to think about. And if there's something that's there that I really think is unhealthy, then I can go a different path with that and think of it this way. But they're just there. They're right there. Like if I'm driving and I'm thinking, okay, like an unhealthy thought is speed up. And it just comes in. And I could backtrack on it. It's like, why did I want to speed up? Oh, that's right, I'm late. So that is in what triggered my thinking of now hit the gas pedal. But if I could actually just take a very present moment, very, very present, and go in and actually see it building before it actually becomes a thought, the building of the thought, the creation of it, and watching it be developed before it is actually a conscious subject of what I'm thinking. And actually, what would it look like? And I know that again, the science would be like, well, these neurons hit that and these nerves do that, and your brain's here and it's in this part of the brain, there's that. And I get that and I respect that because I would like to actually look at it and see it actually be created. And so I was just freaking out in the car. Like it was just so much of a crazy experience for me to actually think about what it would look like seeing the thought to be built before it actually becomes conscious.
Mhm.
And so I was like just thinking about that and thinking about that. And I was like, holy cow, where did this come from? I've never thought about what it looks like, what the building of thought looks like.
Mhm.
And then it got me thinking about, well, it's probably like back rooted and there's a lot of unconscious stuff that's coming in and they're putting that block there and this block's going over here. And then it gets an approval to go into my consciousness. Or maybe there's a disapproval, though, you know what, this is really jacked up. We're not sending that into his consciousness. And but that doesn't happen a lot because all those disapprovals do come into my
It
head a
still
lot.
come in. Yeah. That filter is blocked somewhere.
And I really don't think that this, I put in before you even start talking, I wrote the note down, the building of thought versus just appearing, the actual creation of it. And it's, what does it look, those roots doing? What are they, where did they come from? And why did they come there? How can I backtrack on that? Like I do in my conscious thinking of, well, I was thinking of that and I was thinking of that. Oh, that's what brought me to this. Would be great to be able to have that whole process going into what's being built
Mhm.
and actually seeing why are those blocks being put there? And it was the most amazing experience. Driving down, I was just like, holy shit, this is awesome. This is so amazing because it gave me just this not only feeling like I have the ability and I know that I can control my thinking, but going to just, for me at least, a deeper level of the roots of the thought and the thinking and trying to get into there. And I really, I've contemplated it for a few days now. I've had some experiences where like, what did that look like? What did the building of that look like that I wasn't conscious of? How did that be created? How was that seed planted? And I really don't think that I would have come to that without microdosing that morning. And that was
That is so
beautiful.
cool. Thank you so much for sharing that because that is an incredible example of what happens when the brain has new neural pathways. What you described is neuroplasticity. What you described is your brain thinking differently than it did before, and those pathways were not there to go down before. You would have just had the thought and off it went, just like in the past. So with the microdosing, psilocybin has areas of the brain talk to each other that don't normally connect. Normally we just kind of are like default mode network, right? And we've talked about how psilocybin quiets the default mode network, but it also stimulates connection between other areas of the brain that don't typically connect. That's in large dose sessions, that's what creates a lot of that hallucinogenic response because it's heightened where you're not driving, you're not consciously thinking about it, you're almost seeing it in a visual aspect more than contemplating it in a consciousness aspect. And that's what I love about microdosing because we're able to get those same connections, but in a way that allows us to really be in the moment with it and extract additional information from it. And as we're creating those new neural connections over time, what you're creating is a whole new environment. Just the fact that you have awareness now that your thoughts come in by default, but they don't have to, that doesn't mean you have to think about them. That right there is new. You can choose it. And what you chose instead of focusing on the thought was, where did the thought come from? Why is it here? Almost like, what does it want from me? You know?
Yeah. And when you say grow your own thoughts, then that got me to the, like, after, like I said, I thought of grow your own thoughts at the end, and I thought grow was a huge word for me in that, because that's what it was, what I was contemplating is the thoughts there. It's conscious. It's got a subject, and it's apparent, and it's visual in my mind. And I thought, but the growing of it, like, where did the seed that I didn't see,
Mhm.
where did that seed come from? Where was the nurturing of it to grow the seed to then where I didn't have any awareness of that, to where it all of a sudden grew enough to where now it is apparent. Now it's in my mind. Like,
Hmm.
I wish I could go in and actually plant. I feel, I shouldn't say wish, I feel I can go in and plant
Yeah,
those seeds and actually
absolutely.
watch them cultivate and grow. And I had never had, I never, I mean, I'm very, just whatever's in my head is out of my mouth, and, and so, et cetera. And it was just really an amazing experience for me to go
Yeah.
and think about all of that.
It that's incredible. And I think to use an analogy that you're already using, that cultivation analogy, we think about mushrooms. So rather than a seed, mushrooms start as spores. So underneath the cap are the gills of the mushroom, and in there is where the spores are held. So for those of you that have cultivated, we say optimal harvest time is when that veil starts to separate before the spores drop, because the spores say, hey, it's time to go back into incubation phase. So that's what happens in nature, though. All these spores are released. We don't see the spores. If you purchase a syringe of spores, what you get is this liquid. It's a liquid culture with kind of black dots in it. And those are the spores that are in there. But out in nature, there's spores everywhere from all sorts of things, not just from mushrooms, but stuff floating around from flowers and trees and pollen and all of that. All of that is for the reproduction of the cultivation of new trees, new mushrooms, new aspects of biological science out in nature. But so we talk about the mushroom spores, those are your thoughts. These random thoughts just floating around. What they're looking for is an optimal environment.
Mhm.
So what is the environment that we're creating in our mind that allows whatever spores to cultivate? If we're creating an environment of depressive thinking, negativity, the world is against me, nothing ever works out for me, then any spore, any thought that comes into that environment is going to reinforce what's there. It's going to be sucked into that. Whereas if we're creating an environment of I can choose my thinking, I want healthy relationships, I'm capable of choosing the outcome of my life, then any spore that comes in there is going to be in that environment. And the ones that don't fit that environment, we're going to toss out. Oh, that spore is not helpful. That, self-loathing isn't going to serve me in getting what I want. This particular person that keeps trying to trickle in isn't going to get me what I want. Excuse me. So instead of just thinking about, well, in addition to thinking about where the thoughts come from, think about the environment. What environment am I creating to cultivate these little spores that are just flying around in nature? Because to your point, we're inundated all the time. Every billboard you pass on the highway, everything that comes in through Spotify or Pandora or social media or the radio or just out your window or in the environment of being around other people. All of that is just information coming in. That's all the spores that are floating around out there. But the environment that we create in our mind is what allows something to take root and to develop. And that's where the caution comes in. We're not trying to eliminate everything out there. I mean, we can have certain buffers, like we're only going to spend so much time watching the news or so much time on scrolling social media or somewhat controlling the people that we spend time with outside of work or in social situations. But more importantly than that, we determine what we hold on to and cultivate in our mind. And part of that cultivation is, what do we think about? What do we continue to give time to? That's the watering, that's the air vent, that's the humidity that's controlled. That's the good stuff that goes into the substrate blend. How are we nurturing the things that come into our mind? That's where our control comes in for our thinking. Just because something pops in our head does not mean we have to nurture it or give any additional notice to it. And to your point, Tom, you notice the thought, here it is, but you can make a much faster decision on, what do I want to do with it? Is it serving me or is it not serving me?
Yeah. And I respect all that you said. And there's a choice that there's like, maybe I'll put the word, there's a choice in there of the direction. And I think psilocybin took me into a deeper spot with it of wanting to see how it was built that I didn't wasn't able to really backtrack to. I couldn't backtrack to it. And I wanted to see how the thought popped in my head, how it was built, not to give it a choice of whether it's good for me or not, but just to see it be built.
Mhm.
And I don't know if we as humans are even, if that's even possible to do.
Well, to some degree, potentially. I'm sure there's some neuroscientists out there that are like, oh yeah, I have answers for you. So you can feel free to email us and we will talk about it on group. We'd love to have you. But at the same token, if we take a lot of that just as information, because we have thoughts and then we have thinking, and those are two separate things. The thought is just that variable. It's the information that's coming in. Thinking is actually putting meaning and definition and time and focus to it. So if a bird flies by the window, we might notice, oh, there's a bird. It's kind of just a thought. There's a thing that flew by the window. The thinking is, oh, that was a bluebird. I wonder if that's a blue jay. Or oh, that had a red breast. I bet that's a robin. I wonder if they're building a nest out there. That's the thinking that goes into it. So ideas and information are a constant thing coming in. And to your point, and kind of wondering where did that thought originate? Why did it come out? We don't always know. But we do know that the brain wants to protect us from certain things and it will hide things away. And I like to think of it as the attic in our mind that has the padlock on it. Sometimes things kind of trickle down out of the attic and we're like, oh, no, 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 no. Now's not the time. Put that back up there. Or, oh, no, 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 that's uncomfortable. Shove it back up there. Put an extra padlock on. We don't want to think about that. But when we allow those things that kind of trickle down to come into awareness and to make that determination on whether it's something we want to hold on to or not, then we're not shoving it back up in the attic. We're allowing it to be present and choosing what we want to do with it. And the cool thing is then the brain learns. Again, the brain wants to be efficient. It doesn't want to think about every single thing that comes into our awareness. That's too much work. So in that efficiency, that's where that memory comes in. Oh, this is coming back in. All right, we don't think about that. Well, because it doesn't need to be thought about anymore, we'll put it away. Or something comes in and it can be an awareness, but not have emotion attached to it anymore. That's the other piece of those memories. Usually the stuff that we shove up in the attic and put 95 padlocks on has a lot of emotional connection. And that's why we want to avoid it because it is really uncomfortable or hurtful or sad or traumatic or whatever definition of emotion we want to connect to it. But as we let those things come through and we see them in a new way and think about them differently, just like you did in that experience, what is this thought? Why is it here? What do I want to do with it? Then we can separate the emotion from it and just hold it as information. We're not doing frontal lobotomies. We're not trying to forget that things happened. Information is education. It's how we learn. But we do want to remove that emotional messaging from things that were harmful and hurtful because that's the part that keeps us in bondage, so to speak, to that past idea. It's the emotion. It's like, oh, that was too much. I can't think about that. Not because we can't consciously think about it, but because it hurts emotionally too much. When psilocybin reduces blood flow to the amygdala and is able to quiet down those emotions, and we're able to think differently about something and assign different meaning to it or work through it or interpret it in a different way, now it's like almost being an observer of it. It's like watching a movie of someone else's life, even though it was our own experience, because that emotional connection isn't there defining it anymore. So if we think of the thought more as, I'm going to call it floating variables or floating spores, and what environment are we creating in our own mind that allows for the cultivation of certain ideas, then we can shift what we end up growing. That experience you described, though, is so incredible. Just the awareness of it is different. It's unique. It's an opportunity to, oh no, level up, in that thinking. I'm so glad that you shared that with the group. Thank you.
Thanks for your feedback.
Yeah.
Do we have more time, or
Yeah.
I don't know if we go to 11 or
Yeah, go ahead,
10:30.
Jenny.
Oh, okay.
You keep going.
Well, yeah, you touched on something that things that are emotionally laden. Um, and I mean, that I've had this trick for a lot of years because I'm probably a little late ADHD, and then I had chemo when I was 50, and I feel like my thought processes changed a lot, and they slowed down a lot, and even got a little garbled, and that was 20 years ago. So, but I think when you think about an emotion that's tied, that you keep going down this path. So this little trick that I've had, and I explain it to my own. I'm a nurse, so I explain it to my own patients. Like, when I lived in Texas, I would see these beaten down pathways through the grass. And they would come from like a hole, and this is where the ants were living. They were cutter ants, and they would beat a pathway. I mean, so many of them would beat a pathway to a new bush that I had planted, and they would strip it in one night. That's how many ants were working to strip this plant, that they could beat down a grass pathway. and and it and that was when I first kind of started to understand a little bit about, you know um neural connections in the brain. And it's very much like that. Once you get certain chemicals firing, down a certain pathway, it's so easy to go down that pathway because it's been created, and we tend to think down that pathway. So I learned this little trick where I would envision the pathway and taking a Y and going a different direction, and I would pick one thing and try to, when I started to feel angry about something that really wasn't all that important, it was being displaced, I was displacing frustration. I would, instead of going towards the yelling and hollering, I would go towards going to something peaceful to do, or whatever I chose, whatever it was. And I would do that on purpose, trying to reform a different pathway through my brain. But when it comes to something emotional, I lost somebody about a year and a half ago, and who's been in my mind for 55 years. And you want to cling to that love and that care that you had for that person. But then, I mean, you don't want to lose that, but then trying to learn a different pathway so that when you think of this person, you don't go down, you know, you don't go back down that pathway. It's very hard because it's like, you don't want to wipe that, important connection away, like that person never existed. But yeah, it's hard to um hang on to that piece, but at the same time try to go down the aisle where you don't, like I'm doing now, you know.
Mhm. Because it's
And
the most recent fact.
that's tough. That's really tough.
Mhm.
And that's why I've been thinking about microdosing because, after a year and a half, I'm quite fatigued. But,
Mhm.
and I've found some things ways to deal with it, but it's still tough.
Mhm. No, thank you, Jenny, for sharing that. And that's, the loss is the most recent idea. The loss is what is heaviest and most apparent right now because it's the most recent thing to happen, so it's the freshest pathway. And so the brain will start going
Yeah.
down that really fresh pathway because it has so much feeling attached to it. Um, Dawn raised their hand, and so I want to give them a chance to respond. Might relate to what
Hi,
I asked. Go ahead. Yeah.
it's my first time being on the call with you guys, so I appreciate your availability. And I don't know if this is the right forum, but Jenny, I think you were the reason why I was supposed to be on this call. Um, I lost my husband, um, and I don't want to continue to feel this way. So I thought that maybe this would help. And so I think that I am going to start the microdosing again. I've been one of the OG box people, I guess. And so the email showed up today, and here I am. My fear is though is that I've been changed on a molecular level after losing him, and I don't want those thoughts to be here. I don't want I want to think about the good times, and I know that I'm being selfish when I say I miss him,
No, I don't think so.
but I don't want those to be the only thoughts when I do the microdosing. I don't want to just dwell on the sad. I want to dwell on our lives together. So I'm sorry for taking up so much time, but I just thought I'd thank you, Jenny, for saying that. It just let me know that I'm on the right path.
Absolutely. Dawn, that's exactly what group is for. There's no apologies in taking up time. That's why group goes as long as we all want to be on and connect. Thank you for being here today and for sharing that with us. And that's really what the core of this is conversation, it's community, to be able to share life together and to have conversations that maybe we can't have on an everyday basis with other people that we come in contact with out and about. One of the interesting things about grief is that grief is an emotional experience. And when we're able to incorporate microdosing and going through that grief process, again, it doesn't remove all emotion, and it also doesn't make us forget. We're not rewiring because we want to pretend that something didn't happen. We're rewiring because we want to change the messaging on how we're interpreting the things that have happened. And when it comes to loss and grief can look a lot of different ways. Sometimes it is somebody actually, no longer being on the planet. Sometimes it's a loss of a relationship, even though the other person still exists. It's just a shift. Sometimes it's a loss of a pet or an idea or a career. Loss can look a lot of different ways, but it's what does it mean to us? And you mentioned that you're feeling selfish and wanting to hold on to those ideas. And selfishness is not negative. Selfishness is survival. If
So,
we don't
yeah.
take care of ourselves, then nobody else is going to do that. And the impact and the enormity of the relationship and the importance of the relationship that existed for you and your husband has been a part of your life for an extended period of time. It's meaningful. That has helped shape how you see the world at this point in time and how you see yourself, and the fact that you are experiencing the significance of loss right now means that there was a lot of healthy contribution to each other's lives, and you drew a lot personally from the experiences that you had with him, just as Jenny did with the experiences that she had with the person that has recently left her life. So the goal is not to forget that that's there, and it's not to diminish the helpful gains and the positive experiences and the memories that are there. It's to reduce the painful aspect of the person no longer being here. You are not less of a person because your husband is no longer here. Your life doesn't have less value or meaning or purpose behind it because it's being lived without him right next to you anymore. And that's what we can sometimes get stuck in with relationships is if this other person's not here, I'm not the same. But it's the relationship that's not the same. And the relationship is separate from who you are as an individual. So microdosing can help quiet down some of that messaging about how you see yourself with this other person being gone and allow you to draw only on the things that are helpful and that you want to retain and continue to create that environment, just like we we're talking about with Tom, creating that environment of the thoughts that you want to continue nurturing. The environment is not diminished. The environment doesn't have less substrate to it. It doesn't have less nutrients to it. All of those nutrients, all of that goodness, all of that totality is still there. What do you want to continue nurturing in it? And you want to continue nurturing those positive, healthy, helpful memories of the person that you enjoyed sharing life with without holding yourself back from continuing to experience joy and contentment and peace in life as you're still living it. I don't know if that's helpful, Dawn, but the goal would be that you still see yourself in that way.
Very much so. Thank you.
Jenny, I'm going to give you a chance too to say anything.
Um, well, I'm glad that this opened the door for Dawn. I'm glad you were able to open up because this is extremely fresh for you. And yeah, um, so I'm happy for that. You know, you have to find your path, and it's very painful, and it's long. It's probably a lifelong thing, but being able to function through it, I think is what we're all looking for, and some comfort. But it's never selfish. It's, it, I mean, how can you say that about a relationship that's so intricate to the way you've lived for many, many years, as well as it is self-preservation? Because I hate the saying, and I very infrequently use it, but life goes on.
And if we go
And
back,
it's finding a meaning, it's finding the meaning in that. And the meaning in that person um doesn't end when they depart this world. And that may be because they don't end, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole.
that's next month's group. No, I'm
Yeah,
kidding.
someplace else.
Yeah.
That's all.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. Well, and if we go back to kind of how we started the conversation today and talking about the stress response, grief is a place and loss is a place that we can get stuck on that backside of the bell curve, where we can stay in that excessive and prolonged stress because we continue to ruminate on the loss itself rather than focusing on what was and what is still going forward, which would be as in us as individuals. So kind of starting to come backwards up that bell curve again, back to the moderate stress. That's where we can get the appreciation of the life shared, the relationship shared, but the recognition that, Jenny, like you said, we don't want to put it in a little box of, life goes on, but that is also the reality that we continue living forward. And if we're continuing to live forward, we carry what we learned from that individual, what we learned from that relationship, how it enhanced our lives through into how we're experiencing life now. It's just like Tom was talking about with those thoughts that come in. When the thoughts come in of memories, enjoy the memory. Let the memory linger a little bit. but don't embed it back into the substrate of the idea of loss. Embed it into the substrate of that's how much this person contributed to who I am and where I'm going now and what I'm doing. So how we choose to cultivate those memories and those ideas that come in are how we process through the times that are hard and challenging in loss of any sort. Gianna, I want to give you a chance to add anything that you want to our group discussion today, if something's been on your mind.
Well, I think it's been very helpful to hear what Tom said and what Jenny said. And I don't even know why I'm getting weepy. So there's something to get to look at. Um, it's just a lot sometimes to try and figure out the stress thing because I feel like sometimes I do have I get triggered by people, and lately my response has just been to back away and um not respond, which can be a good thing because responding can sometimes be get in more trouble.
Mm.
um but then I feel like I just back up into kind of isolation. So but I appreciate what Tom said about um, thoughts growing and where do they come from. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I think that, for all of us here today and those who are listening online to this after the fact, that if we can take away the recognition that the control is not always in what thoughts come in. We don't always get to be the boss of all those little minions that are in the brain, building things up and then, inserting them into our neural pathways for whatever reason, whether to torture us or to make us laugh sometimes. But we do get to decide what kind of mindset we want to hold on to. And for individuals who really struggle with that mindset and being able to have some control about that environment, well, how do I find the substrate? How do I know what nutrients are here? How do I get out of this initial depressive or what we call negative way of thinking? That's where psilocybin is a tool. Psilocybin is the tool that can help create the environment to give us opportunity to choose what we cultivate. Psilocybin's our little propagator. It's what with the mushrooms, we grow it in the propagator, but if we think about it as the propagator itself, it's creating that structure to where we can decide what we're going to cultivate in our thinking. We don't always get all the genetics that we want when we get a spore print or when we get a liquid culture, various mushrooms throwing stuff out into nature. But we do decide what we hold on to. When something's not looking the way we want it to, we make a change. But psilocybin gives us a chance to create those new neural pathways that, like Jenny described, the Y in the road, or the fresh snow on top of the rigid tracks sometimes. The field that has no pathway through it yet. That we're not just going to automatically go down, but creating our own pathways of what we want to hold on to and what we want to focus our thinking on. Ultimately, that is what's going to change our responses. Some days that response is going to be going and getting a whole bag of candy corn and enjoying the moment and feeling better about it. And other times the response is going to be, all right, self, what is happening right now? Where is this going? What do I need to do to shift this? And is this a momentary thing or is this prolonged? Is this a way of living that I have allowed to be cultivated that I need to make some serious changes with? That's the harder question often. We can deal with the momentary stuff. That's being a human on the planet. But when we have an awareness that the life we are living is not going to lead to what we want. It's not currently leading to what we want, and it's not going to lead us in the future to what we want, because we're going to get more of the same. That's where we have to make the hard choices that are really uncomfortable. And they're uncomfortable because, number one, it's recognition that we've allowed stuff. We've allowed this environment to be here. We've allowed the toxins in and the pesticides and the manure and all the other stuff that's come into the little propagator. We've allowed all of that, not always consciously. A lot of it gets inherited. But we do get to decide if we keep it or not. Are we going to empty that tray and say, I'm going to get rid of all these inherited beliefs, not to throw it all away, but to set it aside, put it in a compost pile. You can go back and get it if you want to. You don't have to dump it in the trash, but set it aside. Now you have your tray of, okay, I have the construct here. I have all the information I've been given. What do I want to put back into the tray now? What new things need to come in? What do I want to hold on to? We're not trying to create a blank slate. We're not wiping everything off. That would be a loss of the entire life experience that we've had up to this point. That's information. We use that. But are we using it to go forward, or are we using it to hold us back and be stagnant and look for a place to place some blame about why things aren't working out for us the way we want them to? Because pretty much all humans are really good at that, and our culture has certainly contributed to find someone to blame. You know, as a parent, I tell my own kids, oh, you can do your own therapy someday. Work that out in therapy. As a therapist. But it's joking, because we all have to take responsibility for our own lives. And that, to me, is the significance of what psilocybin microdosing allows us to do. Take responsibility without sitting in a place of defeat and victimization and just being the outcome of whatever's been handed to us previously, and now choose the life that we want going forward. How do I quiet down those emotional responses? How do I soften all that inner chatter? How do I contribute to more executive functioning, new memories, new neuroplasticity, new neural pathways? How do I get better at filtering thoughts a little bit faster?
Mhm.
You know, it's like having one of those wire baskets that has really big holes where you're like, well, I think something may have gotten filtered, but I feel like everything's just inundating. And then you get a filter that has teeny, teeny, tiny holes to it, and a lot less is allowed in. That is what microdosing allows you to do over time. That filter becomes a lot more refined, a lot less comes in. It's not that it's not there, it's just caught on the front end because the brain's like, don't need that. That's not going to serve me. I don't need to get upset because someone cuts me off. I don't need to get all wrapped up because someone gave me a weird look. I don't need to, have a bad day because a partner or a friend said something to me that maybe I didn't like. Or maybe I'm just being hormonal and in my own head, and I don't need to punish the world around me before that. I need to work that out in my own mind. We get faster at that. We get more efficient at whatever we decide to cultivate. That's the beauty of the brain being efficient. That's the beauty of the default mode network, and that psilocybin use can reset that default way of thinking and perceiving information. So we're not using it to cover things up and pretend they're not happening. We're using it to create a new framework and a new structure so that we can then become the architect of our own life. We choose which minions come and work for us.
Well, it makes me think about, I've meditated. I'm not the greatest meditator, and I'll go off and on, but I've meditated for a long time, probably 20 years since my breast cancer. And, I didn't grow up in a society that taught meditation. I didn't even hear about it till TM and and the Beatles. So if that's before anybody's time, sorry. but, 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 and I realized that it had great value even then, because, that was when research was coming out about you can affect your blood pressure, you can affect your heart rate with just thought, and so it's always been a strong belief of mine. But I didn't grow up like that. I didn't grow up practicing like I was a Buddhist child, and I see this as a tool, that I see psychedelics in general as a tool for getting there a little bit quicker and making up for that lack of uh, you know, neural training when I was a child, you know. Because I'm 70 now, so I, if I don't do it now, it's not going to happen. And so some people say, oh, talk about how it's a crutch and that sort of thing. It's like, well, sometimes you do need a crutch until that leg sets, and you can get out of that cast or whatever. You need those crutches. Okay, so it's a crutch, big deal. It is, but it's also something that occurs naturally in nature, and it's there for a reason. It's part of how we evolved, and we all know that it's been used for thousands thousands of years, maybe more, you
Mhm.
know. So,
And to your point, Jenny, psychedelics are permanent. When the
right.
psychedelics permanently change the structure of the brain, think about how much time goes into learning how to meditate, sitting in meditation, and then what happens when you come out of it. Like, oh, well,
Right.
I have to do that again tomorrow.
It's a
No,
constant practice.
exactly.
As you look at your watch and you go,
Like,
just like Julia
crap, I've only
Roberts
been
looked at her
meditating
watch,
for 10 minutes.
it's
Yeah.
been 3 minutes. you
Yeah,
know.
feels like an hour. Exactly. Exactly. So, that quieting of the mind is not a new concept. But when we can do it with something that structurally changes the brain so that we can reset that quieting of the mind, then we don't have to go and quiet the mind all the time. We're
Yeah.
not so adverse to being in the mind. That filter has become a lot less porous and filters things a lot faster, so we don't have to go to that space of trying to forcefully quiet the mind or tap ourselves out of it or eye movement ourselves out of it or CBT ourselves out of it because of being so focused on the thoughts themselves. The thoughts come and go and they ebb and flow much more efficiently, and we're able to have a lot more awareness around it. And then the awareness is like, you think back, like Tom, at some point you're going to think back
Mhm.
to, man, that moment was so significant. I can't believe how much has changed in the way I think since then and now as time continues to progress. And you'll see that moment, just like we talked about, almost as like this movie that you watched of an experience that someone else had, but you took so much meaning away from it. And that's neuroplasticity. That's growing your own thoughts. It's creating your own filter. So,
Yeah, today was very meaningful. If I can just enter, I know we're getting late here,
no,
but
you're good.
I got to say, I don't know how to say. My heart goes out to you, Don, and Jenny. I hope that some things that were shared today is helpful for your movement forward. You know, you'll get there. Um, and I don't, you had a lot of confirmation today, Charity, for me, and thank you for I guess selfishly, since we're maybe that's been brought up for I got a lot out so much from so many people or all of you today. And I'm going to continue to explore, that factory of thought that I've never visited, and have a conversation with the minions and talk about, why are you building some of this shit? And
Hmm.
and thank you for building some of the other stuff that comes to my consciousness. But we're gonna have a little sit down, I guess. And that was just I thank you for allowing me to share. That was very huge for me in my car a few days ago of actually knowing that there's a factory there that this is coming from, and that I can maybe just attempt to explore what are those seeds about. So I appreciate the feedback and everything, and much love to you ladies, and this one
Yeah.
especially to my right.
Exactly. Oh. Well, for those of you listening online, if you'd like to participate in our group live, we'd love to have you. Please log on to growyourownthoughts.org. You'll see the calendar on there with dates, times, and Zoom links. Hope that the conversation has been helpful to you today. And for those of you that are on, hang on, we're going to end the recording and then we'll wrap up for the day.